Hi guys, and welcome to the first color correction that we will do together. In this lecture we're gonna do basic correction. We're gonna adjust the tonality for our two clips, and you know that we are going to use the Lumetri scope waveform Luma to achieve this correction. Of course, we want to set our target, what we want to see in the waveform, and do the correction accordingly. So let's start. So we are going to work with the waveform Luma with the Lumetri scopes. I hope you listened to the previous lecture and you know how to bring it up over here. And we are going to work with the basic correction. Before we open basic correction, let's look at our waveform. So our waveform goes from left to right according to our video. If you notice a bit, you have very little highlights over here, and you have quite a concentration of low midtones and blacks. The image doesn't look so bad, but you can adjust it to make it even better. Depends on the project and shot-to-shot consistency. This is something you should always think about when you're working on a clip. Now, our aim here is to open up the graph a bit to have more highlights and less blacks. So we want to take the blacks and shadows up and the midtones up toward the highlight to equilibrate the tonality. Let's open basic correction, and we see that you have input LUT, L-U-T, lookup table. We'll see that later on. You have the white balance, which we will see in a moment after tonality, and you have the tone and saturation. Let's roll down a tone, and this is where we adjust the tonality. Now you have several properties that you can adjust here. We are going to go through how each one of them will affect your waveform and subsequently, of course, your video. I would like to draw your attention to something important about the effect itself. If you come to effects and control, you notice that there are no effects applied for the color correction. As soon as you change a single value from here, the effect is applied. So you don't need to go to your effects panel and apply it and so on. Just adjusting a single property and the effect is applied. It doesn't go away. You cannot reset it and remove it from over here. If you want to remove it, you come to Lumetri color, press delete to remove it. Let's go back to our Lumetri scope and let's start with exposure. If you click and take exposure up towards positive values, notice what's happening to your waveform. It's expanding towards the whites or the highlights. Even the blacks now are almost non-existent and they are all going towards the highlight. This is adding the value of the exposure. You can go up to 7 if you click on the figure and drag it to the right. Fine, let's drag it back to 0. And let's give it a negative value. I would like you to look at your waveform. Notice how everything is going down. All the waveforms are coming down. You're actually removing the highlights and making them blacks. Notice the concentration of blacks over here. So actually, this is the work of exposure. On the positive values, it will take your blacks and your midtones and drive them towards the highlights. And on the negative values, it does just the contrary, drives everything towards the blacks or towards the shadows. Let's see now the effect of contrast. If you add contrast, I would like you to look at your waveform very sharply. I will click on it and add it. Notice how it is expanding both towards the highlights and towards the blacks. It has taken the midtones and the lower midtones and took them towards the blacks, and some of the midtones and the upper midtones and took them towards the highlight. So actually you are expanding towards blacks and whites. But if you give it a negative value, you will be contracting or compressing towards the midtone. So actually it works on both the midtones and the highlights in the two different directions. This is towards black and whites and this is towards the midtone. Now, most of the time you wouldn't want to work with the contrast. You want to work with the highlights without touching the shadows, or work with the shadows without touching the highlights. The highlights here obviously is going to take your midtones and your blacks somehow and drive them towards the highlights. Here you are. This is when you are on positive values, and it's taking the midtones and the lower midtones towards the highlights alone without touching these shadows. These are the shadows on bottom. They haven't changed. But if you give it low values or negative values, it's going to do just the contrary. It's going to drive your highlights towards the blacks. Now, let's reset by double clicking and we look at shadows. Now shallows, if you go up in value, is going to take your blacks and try to push them towards the highlights and create more midtones here. If I drag the shallows towards the negative, you notice that the midtones and parts of the highlights are going towards the shadows or the blacks. Okay, let's reset this. And now let's look at the whites. The whites and blacks here are called the white and black points. The white is the upper level of the whites over here. You can determine this level. For example, if you increase it, you will have more whites than is needed. So the upper level of the whites is increased. Sometimes it's very important. You can combine it with highlights to have even more highlights if need be, of course. I will double click to reset. Now, if you take the whites down, you notice the upper points are coming down as much as possible. You can go down to minus 150. If you take down your highlights, of course, now everything is coming towards the black. Sometimes it's very useful. Cool. Let's reset all this. The blacks, just take up the black points towards the whites or take them down towards more black if you like to. Cool, I will reset this one. The way you work here is pretty easy. What you can start with is the auto here. You click on auto and watch exactly what happened to your waveform. Auto has tried to expand and try to fill for the highlights and try to fill for the blacks. It's also adjusted your blacks quite a lot, minus 11. Now you can glimpse at your video and see exactly if that's what you want. From here you can start to refine the adjustment. You have all these controls. Well, the first thing I notice is blacks is minus 11. Is a bit too exaggerated here. I will put it back to 0. Well, that's pretty cool. Then the whites, maybe I want a bit more whites. You see I'm driving them up a bit. Cool. And then the shadows, maybe we give it more shadows. Let's notice our waveform here. You have this area here. It is this area over here, which looks now not bad at all. You know, they are quite spread. I could work on it. But mainly the general outlook of the waveform is very good over here. Everything is spread evenly. Let's clamp the signal, and usually you'll work on this one. We still have too much white because of this overexposed area. But we're cool. Let's see before and after. Which one you would like. Of course, it depends on your project. I'm not saying this is a bad one, but I could make it better, you know, more lively like this. Cool. Before we jump to saturation, let's go to the next one. Here you are. Now notice in this one, everything is black and dark. So where would you start? You can start with auto, but of course your finger is itching to go to exposure. Let's start with auto over here. And notice what happened to exposure. It went almost to the maximum, 4.6. That's cool, it's not bad. Let's adjust it a bit more. Let's open the clamping. I like this, and I see we are okay here, we are cool here. You notice this area over here is just over down here. Maybe you want to open up this area and see exactly what's happening here. On the waveform, you notice you have this area black here. It is this one. And then next to it, you have the black area here. It is this one. Maybe we would like to increase our highlight. That could work. I don't like it. I'm going to undo. Or maybe we try to decrease our shadows. Giving it positive values, it means you're decreasing the shadows according to the graph. You know, the shadows are going up. Let's see what happens over here. We are balancing a bit more, and I think this is better. You notice here I have more balance, and over here I don't have too much. I can go maybe more. Okay, so it's a matter of decision here. Well, that's not bad. Everything is quite balanced on the chart. This is pretty good. Let's see before. Let's see after. Not bad. Actually, we corrected a very nice shot. Now let's look at saturation. Let's go back to the first clip and let's increase the saturation. So we're adding more colors, okay? And decrease the saturation until it becomes black and white. So it depends on what you're looking for your project. The way I will work with saturation is a bit different. Take this clip and just put it next here and go to the middle. Now notice this is almost the same scene. This is the scene R15 and this is R14. Well, I want to notice the colors, but pretty tedious, right? To play with the cursor up and down in the middle. You can come to window here and open the reference monitor. The reference monitor, you can click on it and just drop it over here. Now, if I move Now, make sure that it's not gang with the program monitor. So you can see one clip on the reference monitor and the other clip on the program monitor. This job cannot be done, by the way, through the source monitor. So if I look at the two clips here, let's come over here. Notice the colors here are not bad and the others are okay. Let's add the saturation on one side. Here you are, for example, and then come back to this one and also add the saturation. Okay, now that's quite cool. Somehow it's cool. It's not that cool. Okay, so we have quite cool colors if you like these colors, if this is what you want. But I think the greens are too much. But actually, this is the concept. This is how you will work. You will adjust the tonality and then adjust the saturation if need be. I will reset the saturation on both clips. I don't think it should be there. The colors are quite good. Let's go to the white balance. Well, you have the white balance selector here. With the white balance selector, you will define what's white, and Premiere Pro will adjust the temperature and the tint. Let's go back to Luminosity scope here and decide that, for example, this is white. Actually, this is not white. This is overexposed white. It's much more than white. You can see it over here. We can go over here and say this is white. Notice how it has adjusted the temperature and the tint. Now, it made it colder. Maybe you will want it warmer. Okay, you don't have to go with Premiere Pro. You can decide on your own. And the tint, maybe you want to go towards the green. That looks very nice now. Let's go to the next clip over here and decide what is white here. Let's go when the guy is coming in. We can see his helmet here. We can decide that the helmet is not overexposed. It is the white one. Click on it and there is a similar adjustment. Of course, now you want to check exactly with your reference. Are we doing a good job? This is what's happening on this one and on your reference monitor. They almost look alike. Here you are. Not bad. The colors are okay. This is more intense. Maybe you reduce the temperature here a bit. And here you are. They're almost looking the same. So this is the first step. This is the concept. You adjust tonality and you go to creative or curves and so on. If you look at your video now, you will notice like we have done quite a good job. Let's stop over here and disable the basic correction. We see before, we see after. Let's come back here and we see before and after. Quite a good job. Congratulations, guys. You did your first color correction. What I would like from you is to take a washed up video, something very bad, and try to use only the tonality and the white balance to adjust your video. Do your best. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, but just do your best. I will give you some exercise later on at the end of the section. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next lecture.